what are some of the other use cases that you've made possible?
Yeah, so one of the ones that we're working on right now, and it comes down to how are we going to do pre-investigations for analysts so that they've got more data? And what I mean by that is, the context around it. That's really key in all of these things. So making sure threat intel is present in the case, or querying, firewall logs and making sure it's there, because everything has a finite amount of time. And if you can route your alerts in such a way, you can then become very effective and efficient in how you're leveraging the ThreatConnect platform. And you're not having to have 150 if checks. That's a bad example, and that's a little bit more for the programmers than the non-technical. But it allows you to route data to playbooks to make determinations on it really quickly. And so the best example I've got around this is actually around geodata. That's a problem that a lot of organizations really struggle with. And the reason being is geodata can be dirty. You can get bad geodata, which will throw off your perspective of where things are originating from, especially when you've got, Tor exit nodes, you've got all of these different things that kind of muddy the waters a little bit. And that geodata is not threat intel. So you're not having, the context given to you by security researchers. It's not, you don't have a little tag beside, a Romanian IP address that says, yeah, confirm this is a Romanian IP address. And now what we're able to actually do is evaluate data that we think may be incorrect based on geosets. And traditionally, the way you would solve this by ingest more geodata sets, which is really quite huge when you think of how big the internet is. You throw IPv4 and IPv6 now, and that's massive. That's, you're talking many billions of data points. Absolutely. Well, if you want to take the belt and suspenders approach, you're looking at a minimum of 3 different data sets: your primary, tertiary, or secondary and tertiary. So what we've actually been able to do is evaluate these alerts that come in, provide a probability that the geodata may not be 100% accurate, and then requery. Actually, I think we are at 4 different geodata sets, but only on the ones that we think are not quite right. So you've now produced an efficiency where you can make that determination and come up with hey, yeah, everything looks great. This geodata matches. We've checked some external ones. We're good. Or, hey, maybe 2 out of the 3 match. You may want to look a little bit deeper in it. You may want to do some validation. Or, hey, none of them match. We've got a problem. And that's a really interesting take on it, because that problem doesn't mean that all your geodata is bad. You don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But now you want to have an analyst perform some manual validation, provide that artistry, make that determination, and say, actually, no, that was fine. And then you can put a checkbox and geodata is validated. And if something occurs again, you've got that historical data set to go off of. So it means that what was once taking 30 minutes for a guy to have a bunch of bookmarks to go through all the different geodata sets now happens automatically and is automatically routed to that playbook within about 3 minutes. It's actually so fast, we had to slow it down because it was beating some of the other tool sets that it was pulling geodata from, and it was causing some errors. So we slowed it down a little bit. So now it's about a 3-minute time to action, where previously, you're copy pasting IP addresses, you're checking your bookmarks, you're going through that verification process, where now it happens kind of automatically, which is really great for an analyst because you're standardizing the approach. You're unifying across all of your analysts versus someone who may have a really great investigative process and someone who may not have, maybe they don't have their own experiences with geodata that's leading them down that path.
So geo is an interesting one because geo is so specific to very specific customers. Mm-hmm. Where do you find that? I mean, because when you start talking, it's funny. With my background, I've worked, and geo was a really specific customer when we were going in and talking to them. And I won't name any of the customers specifically who are looking for that type of information, but definitely governments and financial, let's say global financial institutions. Is that who you're talking to when you're talking about that?
Actually, it's spread further than that, to be honest with you. And the reason being is because some organizations won't take geo-blocking as a consideration. And the reason being, actually, the example I'll give recently is the zoo industry. Zoos, everywhere, a lot of cities have a zoo.
Yeah.
Well, you can't block China, and I'm going to kind of pick on them as they're a great, they have a lot of state actors and they have a lot of IP addresses, and they're one that pop up a lot. But you may not be able to block all of China because maybe you've got a panda exchange program, and you have Chinese zoology researchers that are helping you with your panda program, and you can't engage with them because you're geo-blocking China. Well, just like cloud computing, IP addresses change all the time. Those people may work out of an office that have a static IP. They may work at a home. They may work off of the cell phone network when they're in transit, or they maybe even work off the satellite network when they're in the field. So now, how do you solve that problem? You can't just geo-block. You can't just take the hardline stance, because now you're impacting your business. For a zoology, researcher team, that's the business of pandas, which seems a little kind of crazy when I put it that way, but that's what they're doing. So now with geodata and these automations, we can kind of make some determinations around it and filter based on that. The easiest answer is give them a VPN and be fine. But you still have that source IP address that exists in China. And if you're blocking all Chinese IP addresses, you can't even establish a VPN. So now you've got to open that up a little bit. You're exposing yourself to more risk. And how do you make determinations based on the attacks that are present? And coming back to our correlation discussion, well, that IP address opened up a VPN. We can see maybe that the endpoint is there. We see credential logins. And now you're starting to span that context across all of these different data sources and make a determination off of it through one automated playbook, where previously that may be a 2-hour investigation to garner all that context. It may be shorter depending on, if you have a really experienced resource, but it takes time to grow those resources to make that discussion, that determination, where you can present that information through an automation and everybody's looking at it from the same perspective.
That's pretty amazing, because when you start thinking in terms like that, you start thinking about secure IT companies, manufacturing companies. I mean, when you start thinking really globally and how much is done overseas, that's just a much different. So that was a great response. Awesome. Well, Devin, thank you so much for your time today. Really excited about this and really appreciate all you're doing.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.